More layers now as we continue our coverage of President Trump's second state visit to the United Kingdom. Beyond all of the glitz and the glamour, there is still serious work to be done between the president and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. NBC's Alice Barr is traveling with the president. She joins us now from outside Buckingham Palace. Alice, let's start with that meeting today at Chequers between Trump and Starmer. Do we know any of the key points that we expect to come from that discussion?
Good morning, Cheryl. Yes, so that meeting has been underway, and we actually just heard from President Trump and Prime Minister Keir Starmer sitting down together and speaking about a new tech pact that they inked right there in front of the cameras. This is an effort to advance AI, to advance nuclear technologies, and to join together to strengthen the business ties between the U.S. and the U.K. And President Trump spoke about that as a means of strengthening the long-standing alliance between these two countries. It's sort of a future phase, if you like, for a long enduring alliance. That is really central to what's being discussed today between these two leaders. They're talking about refining the U.S.-UK trade deal, but there are also a number of top American tech CEOs that are on hand for a reception that's going on at Chequers, the country resident of the UK Prime Minister. A little bit of an unusual retinue for this kind of a state visit, but it points to how very central the business relationship really is in terms of everything that's going on, and how that could potentially serve as a pivot point for advancing some of the political issues that certainly the UK, many European allies are looking to President Trump to back them on if there is kind of some of the economic partnership and benefits that go along with those discussions that can serve as a helpful carrot.
And as you mention all of that, Alice, I think it's very important context to keep in mind that this is a very conservative president, a more liberal-leaning prime minister. It does seem, though, that they've been able to find a little common ground here. Are we seeing that, from your perspective, in the state visit?
Yeah, it's a really interesting relationship to watch, Keir Starmer and President Trump. As you noted, they are on different sides of the political spectrum, and that can often be very difficult to overcome really in any setting. Certainly with President Trump, we just saw them sitting side by side exchanging compliments, and I think Prime Minister Starmer has made it an effort from the beginning of his time at Downing Street to kind of go on a charm offensive with President Trump. And you can observe the times when he's trying to sort of lean into the relationship, the times when he maybe gently puts a foot down in some areas. They're about to have a press conference before long here, and that's going to be an interesting test because there are some really important points where they do differ sharply, particularly in the war in Gaza. That's something that we expect to come up, something we've been hearing protesters certainly speaking about. And Prime Minister Starmer is preparing to formally recognize a Palestinian state very shortly after President Trump departs at the end of this visit. That is something that President Trump is staunchly against, something they're likely to get questions about. And so it'll be interesting to observe, is there friction, is there tension noticeable in their responses? They're certainly not lockstep, but they have made efforts to try to have a smoother relationship in service of some of the very important issues that the UK wants to keep, again, the US on sides over.
I really like how you put that charm offensive. And in politics, those connections are so key. I'm curious, from your spot there on the ground, Alice, what's been the feeling around you? Are you getting a sense of the reception just from the general public there in the UK? Here in the US, we've seen some images of both protesters and supporters.
Yeah, I've been able to speak to some of the people, particularly when we were outside Windsor Castle yesterday, where if you think there was a charm offensive that Keir Starmer has been sort of waging with President Trump, it was, every level of charm, of opulence, of splendor that you can think of, certainly for the royal family. And that is not coincidental that effort was, to sort of set the table for what needed to be the nitty-gritty political discussion today, to have that gloss of the royal meeting yesterday. But the people that I was speaking to, there were supporters of of President Trump who said that they want to see, that they like seeing discussions in the U.S. about what's happening in the U.K. For instance, there were really big anti-immigrant protests over the weekend here in London, and Elon Musk called in virtually to kind of encourage some of those. J.D. Vance, the vice president, spoke about that, and they said they like that. They want that kind of intervention from the president. There were protesters who, though, were somewhat frustrated with the royal treatment that the president is getting, though they said they understand that the UK needs to work with President Trump. They'd like it to perhaps be a little bit less over the top than some of what we've seen here.
Really interesting perspective. Alice Barr, always appreciate your time and your insight. Thanks so much.